Hey, what's poppin', everybody? Welcome to the FNB App Academy 2025. I am your host. My name is Karabo Mohole. I am always excited and bubbling to be part of the App Academy ecosystem, the perfect place to get all of you guys kickstarted on building that winning app of yours. Now, obviously, this is an 8-week marathon, right? A journey of building those beautiful apps. And obviously, so far, we've had 4 amazing lessons, right? So I do hope that all of you guys found those lessons informative and engaging. So please also share on social media what those lessons meant to you guys, just so somebody can also tap in and understand the power of the App Academy. So the previous lesson was all about software development life cycles, and this week or today we'll be focusing on the principles of UX design, right? Talking about the user experience. Your apps must be really easy to use for someone like me, just to understand the importance of that beautiful transition of the apps. All right, but first, let us meet the guys behind Bottles by Pick n Pay, a previous People's Choice winner at the App of the Year. Let us check it out.
I'm Enrico.
And I'm Vince, and together we co-founded one of the first on-demand delivery apps in South Africa called Bottles, the alcohol delivery app. Alcohol delivered in 60 minutes.
You're welcome.
You need to remember that in 2016, Uber had just launched a taxi app, right? Mr. Delivery was still where you phoned into restaurants. It was a menu that lived on customers' fridges, and you called in and did manual deliveries. There was no app. I remember our first order, we had planned to do the delivery ourselves, but both of us had full-time jobs. And when the order came through and the bottle store messaged us saying there's an order, we were like, did you place the order?
I didn't place the order.
I didn't place the order, and neither of us could actually go and do the delivery. So out of pure need, we booked an Uber to the bottle store, and somehow that worked. And somehow we carried on doing that probably for more than a year.
At some point, we had 27 phones with accounts on both Uber and on Bolt, and we were spending probably about R1 million a month between Uber and Bolt, and it was really manual, but it was fake it till you make it, right?
But we won the People's Choice Award in 2019. In 2020, we won App of the Year in the small to medium-sized category. I think both awards personally were a huge accolade for a lot of hard work that we had put in, both us and our teams, for years. It also really galvanized our team into believing more into what we were doing.
We had a very cool business. It was going quite smoothly, and then COVID came, right?
Yeah, and with COVID, there was a ban on liquor sales. The president announced on the Monday that liquor sales would be stopped by the Thursday. On the Friday, we met with Pick n Pay and agreed commercials to pivot our business from liquor to grocery. And by the Monday, we went live with Bottles as a grocery delivery platform. A 4-day pivot, which was 4 years in the making. That led us to us being acquired by Pick n Pay in December 2020. And the app Bottles was rebranded to Pick n Pay ASAP, which now does all your grocery essentials delivered in 60 minutes.
All right, beautiful story there by the guy behind Bottles, a story about innovation and reinvention. Let us know what you also think about that video. But speaking about you guys letting us know, please, we want to hear a lot from you guys on socials. Please don't forget to hashtag FNB App Academy. Engage with us, talk to us. Let us know what these lessons have been about, but also let us know about you on our socials. But speaking about socials, let's take a look at what you guys have been up to on social media.
Here's what I've learned from lesson 4. The way to a successful app is a concrete foundation.
Today's lesson was an eye-opener that you cannot build just because you feel happy about something, but you have to have a plan that follows a certain procedural steps.
Each and every step is important. So the key takeaway from this is don't build apps, but solve problems.
With these lessons, each and every lesson has made it easier. This is something that I once thought too difficult to grasp. But the explanations, the way Nolutando explains things, the way Bilal was explaining today, I actually believe in myself.
Future is tech and future is coding.
Shout out to FNB App Academy, shout out to IT Varsity, and shout out to people that actually open these WhatsApp groups for us to join, So yeah.
All right, beautiful stuff. It's always amazing just to see you guys' faces on social media. You guys look amazing, and I hope that you guys are taking this serious about engaging with us on social media. We love to see the traction of the App Academy. All right, so right now on the platform, we're joined all the way from Durban by Masi Katrada. Masi, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for asking.
All right, beautiful, beautiful. So Masi Katrada is the head of technology at IT Varsity. Now, Masi, please let us know a little bit about yourself.
Cool. My name is Masiula Katrada. I've basically been busy with technology or trying to find a career in technology since I left school. I currently work as, like you said, the head of technology at IT Varsity, which basically means that I make sure that everybody who needs to use our tech system, like our websites, our emails for internal use, or the LMS, I'm the one who makes sure with my team that everything happens smoothly and everybody can get their work done.
All right, beautiful. Now, obviously, Masi, the App Academy is a beautiful ecosystem that focuses primarily on, informative and skill development and, ushering a new generation of app developers. But let us go back to 8 years ago on your unique story. I believe you're part of the IBM hackathon 8 years ago, and I also believe that you probably have won that hackathon. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that story?
We did. My team got the first prize in that hackathon. This was maybe about 2 or 3 years since I started working as a developer and designer full-time, and we had to build solutions for some critical problems in our country. And yeah, we were chosen as the winners. It's not unlike, it's not very different from the App of the Year awards that FNB hosts as well.
All right, beautiful. So Masi, the App Academy is not just for beginners, it's also for intermediate and advanced app developers. But focusing on the people who are just starting on their journey as app developers, is there a way that you can actually motivate them and encourage them as they start on the app developing journey?
So having a platform or something like the App of the Year would have been amazing. And when I was starting off, to be part of things like this was the best thing ever, to get to know the industry and to get to know people and build a network. And like I mentioned, there is also the App of the Year to look forward to. So people who are busy with the App Academy, hopefully don't just go on to build their own businesses or become tech leaders, but maybe they also have a shot at the App of the Year award as well. I think it's a fantastic place to learn, to grow, to interact with this entire new industry that some people are stepping into for the very first time.
All right, beautiful. That is Masi Katrada, all the way from Durban, the head of technology at IT Varsity, who will be taking us through now the principles of UX design. I'm really excited just to hear a little bit about this. I hope you guys are ready. Grab a cup of coffee, get your pens and papers ready just for this beautiful session with Masi Katrada, all the way from Durban. Masi, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Welcome to this lecture on the principles of UX design. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that by the end of this lesson, you will be comfortable with the concepts that we're going to be able to cover, and you will be able to go on to build beautiful user experiences for your products or for your clients. There's a lot to cover today, and we're going to take a bit of a break from the technical and practical lessons. And this is going to be a lot of an information dump, just to get you familiar with these two fields and all of the related components and fundamentals. To begin with, let's talk about UX, UI, and layouts. 3 different concepts or 3 different fields very closely related together, but each one has some nuances to them. Okay, we'll start off with UX. What is user experience? A user experience is the overall experience that a user gets when interacting with your product or your business. It's their entire journey planned out and then implemented in a final product. The user experience deals with the emotions that a user feels. It talks about their feelings, using your app and making them feel good so they constantly come back to your product later. The user experience designer will deal with things like the customer's satisfaction, the overall effectiveness of the product or the application, and usability and accessibility for users. It, remember, deals a lot less with design and with layouts, as we're going to find out later, and got to do a lot more with user satisfaction and customer delight. Next up, user interfaces. It's a part of your complete user experience, but it deals with one specific part of it only, just one little piece, and that is creating a functional interface for users to interact with your system. Now, you've seen an interface before in your car, in your dashboard, or in a microwave oven, the little screen, or on your phones or on a website. When you unlock your phone and you look at all of your apps, that's the first interface from your operating system that they've designed to help you use your device, or on a website, for example, to help you navigate through the pages and guide you through the content. It's got to do with everything that your user sees on your platform or in product. It's got to do with the buttons and the text and the menus, the typography, all of the elements that they need to look at or interact with. The UI design, as a UI designer, as interface designer, you will be focusing on the functional parts of the application, the parts that make it usable, and a lot less on the design or the emotions of the user experience journey. So again, it's like making something work, making it functional, and then as a UX designer, you come in and make it pretty and make it beautiful and design the overall journey. Finally, before we move on to some of the concepts and principles related to UX and UI design, let's talk about layouts. The layout is usually the first step of designing your user experience. And it's got to do with where the elements of your page and how the elements of your page or your app are positioned on the page. Okay, this is part of obviously of your user interface creation, and it's all about laying the foundation for the work to continue, to make for example, to make your app responsive later on, or to create all of the facilities and all the places where all of the other elements on your page are going to be aligned. It's going to we use it to create a hierarchy, which we'll talk about later on, that basically guides the user from the most important content right down to the least important content, and guides their focus to exactly what you need them to focus on. So that's it for the introduction to UI, UX, and layouts. Now let's dive into some of the concepts that you're going to be dealing with as a UI, UX designer. We're going to begin with some of the concepts related to layouts. Now, like we mentioned, a layout is the starting point of your work, and it's going to direct how everything, all the elements and information on your page is going to be laid out. A good layout, planned out properly from the beginning, creates something that is intuitive and easy to use and navigate. It creates order and there's no confusion. A bad layout does the opposite. It creates frustration in your user. It things are lost, they don't know how to navigate things, they need special instructions maybe to get to what they want, and most likely they are not going to come back to your app. Now, inside, when we talk about layouts, let's cover the first concept, which is grid systems. Now, as layouts are one of the starting points for your work as a UX designer, a grid system is probably the first place you're going to start off with when designing your layout. And a grid system is basically a framework that you set up, framework of columns and rows that will dictate the flow of the rest of your application or product. Okay, a grid system creates consistency. It creates consistency within elements, and it creates consistency on the page of how those elements are arranged and how they flow from one section to the other. It's all about creating a logical flow. And when you design your grid system well from the beginning, you keep in mind responsive layouts as well. How is this thing going to look on different screen sizes, mobile versus your tablet versus your TV? You make all of these important decisions with your grid system. Okay. Now, as beginners, as novices, we make a few common mistakes at this stage before we even get to the other things. When we're working with the grid system, one of the first mistakes we make is we completely forget about it, or we think that it's a simple design, we can get away with it, and this creates a lot of pain later on. You need it when working with, like I said, your mobile apps or your websites, but also very helpful when working with other things like email newsletters, for example, or creating a printed out worksheet or even a poster that you're making for school. Just doing the work early on to get your thinking organized and having that decision made where everything is going to flow really helps you when moving on to our next concept: spacing and white spaces. This is all about balance, it's about harmony, it's about creating breathing room within elements and within other components or within columns and rows. When you line sections up on a page, you don't notice, if you go to a properly designed app or website, you'll notice that everything does flow, yes, but the way that things flow in between different sections, there is space for each section to breathe and the next one to begin. Things are not cluttered, things aren't placed on top of each other. No, we use white space and we use something called gutters to create cushions, or to separate our work. You've already come across two concepts that we use when dealing with white spaces, and that's padding and margins. Just to quickly recap those two, because they are very important when designing beautiful, well-functioning layouts. Paddings, if you remember, is what we use to create space within a container. So if you have a box like a div box, or in this example, if you have a grid in your grid system and you have a button or text in between it, padding is what you use to make sure that those elements don't touch the borders, or they have enough room between those borders, or if there are multiple elements within a box, those elements are also separated. Just keep in mind this example, a simple example. You have a heading and you have a paragraph underneath it, and then you have a follow-up button. Those things should be nice and neatly aligned. You can already imagine the way that they should look. Okay, without spacing, maybe they touch each other, maybe the button overlaps. This is bad design. We want to really try to avoid that. Okay, so like we mentioned, just to recap the rules and common mistakes with white spaces, just keep this in mind as you're designing. Make sure that everything has enough room, but not too much room. Okay, too much space is also bad. That just makes things look scattered. Okay. Remember to use your paddings wisely, and remember, it's always good practice to not let elements touch each other. That's breaks the flow, it breaks the rhythm, it looks untidy even. Margins, use your margins wisely as well, and be very, very clear about the differences between the two and when to use one and the other. Mixing them up could cause a lot of problems later on. All right, so the next concept is alignment. Remember, so far we're not really talking about the colors and the menus and stuff. We're going to come back to that, the elements. Now we're just talking about what we do when we're laying the groundwork before we even start putting in the pieces of our page. We're going to think about our rules, how we're going to align things. Now, your grid system comes in very, very handy here again, because this is the first decision that you make that's going to guide how everything else is going to be aligned as you start to populate your web page or your app. Okay, alignment is all about the positioning of elements related to each other, right? It's about things like your text, your buttons, your images. Do they come on the left? Do they go on the right? Or do you put them in the middle? We see this, we're very familiar with alignment when it comes to text, especially when using things like Microsoft Word, for example. We use the alignment features to give us that look and that flow of our content that just makes sense. Rules to follow, like I mentioned, use the grid. Okay, make sure your grid is enforcing the alignment, and the rules that you set up for your grid are enforcing that alignment for all of the other elements that follow. Okay, and use alignment wisely. Most of the things that we're going to cover, a lot of it is, okay, there are a lot of rules that we have to follow, but a lot of it comes from intuition, from trying different things out and just seeing what flows well. Okay, just before, if I forget to mention this point, a very, very handy thing to do is to use references like other companies, or use AI like ChatGPT to actually critique your work and tell you what's wrong. And hopefully, by understanding all of these concepts, when you get that kind of feedback, you'll know exactly what needs to change and hopefully make some drastic changes to your work. Now, when using alignments, remember, use your alignment to create clear visual relationships between elements and other elements and their position on the entire page, and use it to create order and balance and help with the overall structure of your page, right? Now, common mistakes, like we mentioned, is simply misaligning items where it just doesn't really make any sense, or inconsistent alignment across pages, across various elements on your web page. Let's take one example of a navigation menu. Where do you put your links? Where do you put your logos? Do you put it on the left? Do you put your logo in the center and your links either side? Do you put the links on the left and the logo on the right? I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer, but when you put it together, you'll be able to see, does this actually work for my users, or is this just nonsense? The next concept I want to talk about is hierarchy. Now, we've mentioned the grid system, we've mentioned alignment, and we've mentioned white spaces. Now, hierarchy it talks about the exact order that things appear when your page loads or when your users visit your app. Okay, it's about arranging elements to show they're important, right? This is how you get your users' attention, and you as the designer are now responsible for making that attention flow according to what is the most important thing on your page. Okay, to create this hierarchy between elements or between different pieces of the page, we use two techniques, right? One is scale and the other is contrast. Scale is all about the size of things, right? Usually bigger things are seen as more important or are more prominent. They grab your attention more. Like think about a headline, for example. Think about a heading. We use them in specific cases to make sure that the user sees that. For example, a call to action. But what if you used H1 or H2, for example, for all the text on your website? then there's no hierarchy. Nothing is more important than the other. Everything just looks the same. Okay. And when we talk about contrast, we talk about visual differences between elements. For example, the color, the size, or the font weight of things. A very good example is what we've been talking about, a heading versus a paragraph. There's a clear contrast there. The heading grabs your attention and it's the title, the main focus, lets you know what you're getting into, and the paragraph gives you more information. Okay. So the rules to keep in mind when designing a proper hierarchy for your page is think about what's the most important thing first and what the user needs to see, what's the next most important thing, third, fourth, etc. But the least important thing last, right? Making sure that while you have your user's attention, it is being spent wisely. Okay, again, to remember with scale, larger elements catch people's attention first, right? So keep that in mind and do not make everything large. And contrast. Use contrast wisely, not just to create separation, but to to distinguish elements, yes, but also to make things a little bit easier for your user to read. This is important when an important mistake that many designers make with incorrect use of contrast. For example, a light text against a light background. The contrast, it's bad. It makes, even for people without eyesight difficulties, it's difficult to read. Okay, finally, under layout, I want to talk about one more concept, but this concept, it doesn't really have to do specifically with layouts, but it's going to come up across your designing journey. It's consistency. Consistency. This is all about making sure that all of these decisions that you made until this point are the same across your entire application and all of the pages on your application. It doesn't make sense to create a grid layout and do all this work and make decisions for your homepage, but then in your contact page or in the about or blog page, whatever, you throw that out the window and it looks like a completely different app. It looks like a completely different system. You create these rules so that they become something, they become part of something called a style guide or your documentation. And these rules remain consistent throughout. Now, these are the 5, I would say, the most core, the most fundamental concepts that UX and UI designers and layout designers need to learn. The rest of them basically kind of follow from these. But if you break these rules early on, it's going to be very difficult to save your work with the other stuff. Okay. Just a few rules I want to talk about when it comes to consistency. It's remember, it's all about creating uniform design and a uniform design language across your product. And probably when you talk about UX design, it's about creating consistency with the brand as well, with the imaging or imagery of the and the messaging of the brand and the style that users may already be familiar with. Rules. Repeat everything. Repeat your styles, repeat the spacing decisions that you make, repeat the color choices that you make for certain elements, maybe call to actions. Across your site, call to actions have a similar theme, for example. Okay, use design systems and style guides. We'll come back to those a little bit later on. And like we mentioned already, common mistakes, using different elements or different design languages across your site or across pages. And well, we're talking about consistency, and the biggest mistake you can make is being inconsistent within your same page. Also, when separating sections or when separating your grid, use consistent measurements, use consistent widths and spacing, use consistent colors, and use consistent typography. If you're using one font and one font weight for headings on one page, do the same thing for the other pages as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of what I call the groundwork of UX and UI design. These are the things that it took me a while to get the hang of, but they form the foundation of so many other designs, all of my designs, whether I'm working on graphic programs or on web stuff or mobile and things like email newsletters. Understanding these fundamental concepts really helped me to start building better interfaces. Now, moving on, let's quickly go through elements and components. Okay, now this is here we're going to start talking about the building blocks of your page or of your app. These are the individual items or elements, as we learn to call them, that come together to build the entire thing. Okay, we'll go to a brief overview of some of the main components and elements, and just talk a little bit about some of the things to keep in mind as a UX UI designer when working with these elements. All right, so a component first, let's talk about that. A component is a group of elements, right? We call them reusable or modular blocks. It's a nice way to remember what they are. They are a bunch of components that we know will typically be used together in the same way over and over again. So instead of redesigning it all the time, we create something called a component, like a group, okay? An idea of what a component might be is something like a navigation bar or cards that used to give users information, or a call to action or a banner. Now it's made, these components are made up of different elements. For example, navigation bar might be made of the actual background, a logo, and the links, the buttons on that bar. Instead of putting that together every single time we need it, we can create a component, make sure that that component follows the rules that we talked about earlier. Everything is spaced out, there's contrast, we're using good colors, and it fits into our grid system well. Then you should be able to take that component and copy and paste into any other part it's needed, and it should work well. Same goes for a banner, same goes for some cards or some buttons or URLs that you're working with. Right. Some rules to keep in mind: make sure that you're thinking about modular design early on, and make sure to not overcomplicate things again. So consistency is going to be a base rule throughout, but also keep in mind, keep things simple always, as much as possible, right? And be wary of creating redundant variations of things that, you know, something you already made could suffice for. All right. Now, elements. So we talk about elements as part of a component, but when we talk about an element, we just talk about the absolute most basic piece of code or of a UI that belongs on your page. Could be text, could be headings, it could be an image, could be buttons, right? Anything that needs to be placed on your page, we will refer to them as an element. And when we have a rule for combining elements together, we call that a component. Okay. Some elements that I would like to touch on in this lecture. Okay, there's just about 4 or 5, and many of them you are already familiar with. Starting with typography or the paragraph. This is probably going to be majority of your app, unless it's an image app or a video app. Most of what you're going to be working with is text. So it's important to apply all of these rules to your text first. So, rules like alignment, rules like contrast, and rules like the fonts or the typefaces and the font weights that you're going to be using. Make all of these decisions early on, create rules for them, and be consistent about how you use it throughout your application. All right. Some rules for font. Keep it simple again, and limit the number of typefaces or fonts you're going to use. Usually designers recommend just 2, maybe 1 for headings, 1 for paragraphs and buttons and other things like that, just 2. And even limit the font weights that you're going to use, right? You don't need to be creating so much contrast on your page. And you don't just need to use fonts to create contrast. You can use other elements like we've learned. Okay, ensure that your fonts are legible, right, and consistent with your, if it's applicable to you, with the entire brand. Right. Oh, and before we move on to buttons, on fonts, make sure that your spacing rules are used for your type as well, for your text. Very, very important. There's specific, like we've mentioned, margins and paddings for spacing between elements or between rows and columns of our grid. When we deal with text, we have, it's so important to think about spacing that we have special units, I guess to call them, to talk about space between letters or space between words or space between paragraphs. So you can go as deep into that as you like. But for now, we're going to move on to buttons, right? We know them as hrefs or our A tags. These are links that basically make up most of the interactivity of a website or of most apps. They navigate you from one place to the other. They let you interact with a page, like for things like uploading or submitting a form, for example. Design buttons that fit in with the rest of your work, that are consistent with your spacing, your colors, your contrast, and your fonts, and create buttons like they are little components of themselves, right? Maybe sometimes you have a button that's just a link, or sometimes you want to have a button that's very prominent, that has a background and different states like hover effects or press or disable states. Make all of those rules early and be consistent with those rules. Next up, let's talk more about colors for a little bit. Usually it's, people get everything up to this point right, and I know this is something I struggle with a lot as well, working with colors. Firstly, there's just so many to work with. If you open up your palette, or if you open up an RGB palette, there are thousands and thousands of colors. How do you even begin to decide which ones to use? You know, if somebody has the brand Bible already or the brand documentation, that's easy, just follow what they said. But if you have to make it up for someone, what do you do? So firstly, make sure that everything is consistent, etc. Make sure that the colors that you use are pretty and work well for your brand or for your page. Make sure that it offers enough contrast. But one handy tip, learn about the color wheel. Just Google it or ask an AI to describe how to use a color wheel, and that alone will help you decide most of your color decisions or your color rules. It tells you what colors can go on top of each other, what colors should go in close proximity with each other, what colors blend well with each other, what colors if you want to use for your navigation bar that contrast well with your menu bar or whatever. But learning the color wheel just teaches you the relationship between different colors, and it helps you to design a unique color palette for your product. Okay, remember on that point, be consistent. Again, I just have to mention that one more time. Contrast, and do not use too many colors or too many color variations. This makes something look cheap or childish, and is not very neat to look at. So try less first and then use more as you need. Okay, the next thing that you will be tasked with tackling is your brand or your product's visuals and imagery, right? So along with the text and the buttons and the colors that create this design experience, you're going to be using images and other visuals as well. For example, icons or pictures for your banners or things of that nature. They're just some things to remember. It's hard to go through the rules of how every single image should work or how it should be edited. That's not what we're going to be talking about. We just want to make sure that our job as a UX designer is that things are going to be laid out well. Okay, things are going to be designed consistently. So you want the same icon style that you use on one page or on one part of the page as the other pages. We learn about Font Awesome in Appreneur. We perhaps touch on it in the App Academy. That's one style of icons that you can use, and because you're using that same pack of icons, your design is consistent. All right. So if you want to use icons for your navigation menu, use the same one for your footer menu, where you want to give put an icon for a phone or envelope for your emails, for example. And the same goes with your images. Now, as the designer, as you will be tasked with giving feedback to people who are sending you those images, to make sure that they're coming to you in the same format, that they're edited consistently so they all look like they're part of the same platform or the same page. And you'll be the one also basically optimizing them, aligning them, and placing them appropriately with other elements of your design. Finally, we have to talk about menus, but we've already mentioned menus quite a bit. This is just we're talking about the component for your main navigation of your application or your website. How do you get people from point A to point B? Make sure it is clean, it is simple, it is prominent, and again, it's consistent across the site, so people always know how to get around, and make sure it aligns with all of the other rules that we talk about. Okay, keep it structured and label them clearly. If you're going to use icons for your navigation, again, just make sure that they are consistent, make sure that they are spaced well enough, make sure that overall it looks good. And again, just want to repeat that tip. If you ever need to know if this is a good design choice or bad design choice, look up other examples, look up some of the big guys' websites, look up other apps, or just simply ask an AI, what do you think about this in terms of proper UX and UI design principles? Am I doing it right? Or do you suggest any changes? Okay, common mistakes just want to mention with menus. One thing is poor labels and not being able to read those labels, or the labels don't really provide much information on what's going to happen after you click on it. And something called nesting menus, right? Maybe try to stick to 1 or 2 levels. That means when you have a main menu item and then you have sub menu items after that, don't do sub menu items, and definitely don't do sub menu items. Think about how poor that looks for someone who's trying to navigate the site. It's kind of a mess and makes things a little bit complicated. So again, keep things simple and try to avoid nesting too many menus. Okay, when we're talking about, we're going to be moving on to putting it all together, but there's one more thing we need to talk about in components and elements, and we've been kind of touching on it and dancing around it. It's called proximity and grouping. Okay, this is the principle of placing items close together, right? When we talk about components, the proximity rules are what defines what elements can be placed together and what components can be placed together. Remember, the design of a page is not just really concerned with the design of individual pieces of content that you're placing. It's got to do with the entire design language of the entire system. And part of that is understanding an element and its neighbors. That's what creates flow. It helps us create hierarchy. It even helps us create contrast. But the rule of thumb is group related items together, and also make sure that they're following the rules we talked about earlier. Use of your white spaces to make sure that there is a separation. We are related, but there's also a separation between things. And avoid scattering and overcrowding. This is the anti-proximity or anti-grouping rules, where you're just trying to, for the sake of grouping things, put things together, and they don't really make any sense. It doesn't really work for the design and for other components of the design. Okay, so it was a quite quick, I know, and there's a lot to go into each one of these concepts, but we leave it at there for the section on components. And finally, we're going to talk about how we're going to put all of this knowledge together. Our home stretch now, and let's talk about wrapping everything up and putting everything together. Okay. In this section, I want to talk to you about some of the techniques to actually start using what we've learned so far when building up your products, and just a few other maybe small notes that is going to help you along in your user experience and user interface design journey. Okay, the first thing we're going to be talking about are wireframes, mock-ups, and prototypes. Okay, basically very similar concepts that happen in the early stages of your design process with your client, or if you're designing something for yourself, you will do this work before you even start writing any code. And it's all about creating a visual representation of what is going to be built. It's like what the architect or the engineer does before he gets everybody else in to start building the final work. So let's start with wireframes. Wireframes are the most basic type of visual representation of a project or product, and at this point you don't even use any tech. It's very low tech, it's not functional, doesn't really look good, and have design elements. It's basically just pen and paper. That's all it needs to be, or a whiteboard and some markers where you can plot out your grid or plot out your page and start to make decisions about where elements are going to go, or what kind of elements you're going to need to populate this page, etc. The next thing from there, you can go ahead and create something called a mock-up. Now again, just a reminder, doing these steps early on really helps to free up your mind for the other creative processes and for the other decisions, and making sure that your design fits according to these rules. It's very, very helpful to set some of these rules early on and make some of these design decisions. And with wireframes, mock-ups, and prototypes, you can really see it come to life before you commit to the work. So a mock-up is a little bit higher quality than a wireframe, and it's usually done in something like a graphic design software, or software like Canva or Figma, where you actually show your user what the end result is going to be. This is a very important a phase in your design process for getting client and customer feedback. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, when we come to the lecture of design thinking, these concepts will come up again, but for completely different use. And finally, we have prototype building. This is something, if you've used Figma, if you go ahead now after this and research Figma, this will be the tool for you to create prototypes, where it creates almost real life usable versions of your app. It doesn't really do anything, it's not connected to anything, but it shows you all of the states and all of your columns. It shows you your not columns, elements. It shows you where everything is going to be placed, and people can play around with it and give you feedback. You can change things, you can map out user journeys and all of that cool things. So that's the place where I would start. And from personal experience, whenever I had to design something, websites, apps, or emailers, I usually start with the team on a pen and paper. Before we even get to the tech and start to bog ourselves down in using the tech and confusing ourselves with details like design and all that, we just use a pencil and a paper, okay? And it gets the ball rolling. Okay, so some rules here. Just remember the wireframe, start with them first, use it for feedback, and do not try to jump into the visual stuff too early. Definitely do not try to jump into the code stuff too early, especially when you're building something from scratch. All right, next up from there, logical follow-up after creating your mockups and prototypes is to create a style guide. Now, more helpful when you're working with a team, especially a remote team, or even your own team in front of you, to get everybody on the same page and to make sure that everybody stays consistently on the same page. You create a style guide. It's basically just documentation where you describe the problem and you describe the solution, and that becomes the rule, and that's set in your style guide for how everything else is going to work. So for example, your style guide could tell you your brand colors, it could tell you how many column layout your brand is allowed to use. It describes how responsive designs should be used, etc. Everything that you do, all of these decisions you make are very, very important, and it's a very good idea to document them, similar to how we do documentation with software projects. Okay, so some rules is to remember with your style guides. It's meant to create consistency, so this thing needs to be updated, it needs to evolve as you and your team make decisions. You can never ever allow it to become outdated, and the reason for it being there is so it can be enforced. Okay, don't let it become a background process, something you forget about. Keep it in front of you and watch how it makes the rest of your process so much smoother, right? Okay, number 3, well, this is the third to last thing that I'm going to talk about, and it's we're going to talk about user flows, clarity, and user feedback. Okay, user feedback here is not talking about telling users what to getting user feedback on what they think about your design or your page, etc. This is more about giving the users feedback while they are using your application or your website. Feedback like sound effects when they click on things, or animations, or something as simple as a button press. When they click on a button, it kind of looks like it goes in or it changes its state. This is very important for creating usability with your users. And once you get into your UX UI journey, you're going to come across a concept eventually called micro interactions, and this is just another layer that you can add to your product to make it even more memorable for your users. User flow, we can't touch this a lot when we talk about hierarchies and things like that. It's all about designing and thinking about how information is going to flow, how the user's attention rather is going to flow from one bit of information from one part of your page or your app to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. It's very closely related to the hierarchies we talked about, but we also, when we talk about user flow, we think about all of the different pages and all of the different navigation endpoints that a user can take, and we make sure that all of them are mapped out correctly, all of them make sense, and the user is not going to go into some back nook of your app and get lost and have no idea what's going on. And then the third point is, on that note, is clarity. If your app or your website needs an instruction manual, it's probably not designed very well for the user, right? When a user comes to the app for the first time ever, your user flow, the feedback, the hierarchies that you set up should guide the user by themselves. You do not need to put instructions to say, now scroll, do this over here, this button does so and so. Your icons, your imagery will take care of that. Your everything is clear enough and everything flows well enough logically that the user doesn't feel lost, the user doesn't feel overwhelmed, and ultimately they do not get frustrated using your system. Okay, rules for creating good design flows is keep it minimal. Again, keep it simple, keep it consistent. These are our base rules that we talked about, but when it comes to designing user flows, keep it as minimal as possible. Try not to make users bounce around your app too much. Try not to send them to too many different pages. Keep the focus in one place as much as possible, right? And as you're creating that flow, keep in the back of your mind the navigation. How does the user get back to where they were if they move away from one place? Is it logical enough? Is it clear enough for them to get to find their way back? Okay. Right. Second to last thing now, let's talk about usability accessibility and affordance. Okay, let's start with usability. Again, it follows up from our point earlier about making things clear and creating a good enough flow. It just emphasizes even more how important it is to make something that people will intuitively know how to use without any feedback from developers or from company, without having to go to support. They should just be able to hop in and find their way around. Okay, it must be easy as possible for them to use your product. Accessibility, similar to usability, but accessibility, we want to make sure that our designs are inclusive for people who are differently able, right? Some people use screen readers, or some people use keyboard navigation. Some people are visually impaired. This, again, you can come to a bit later on once you taken care of your foundations, but these are very good things to keep in mind, especially to make sure that most amount of users possible can use your product and feel included as well. Okay, affordance. This has nothing to do with price or money. This in UX and UI design refers to designing something with clues that show how it's going to be used. Okay, so like it follows up from what we were saying earlier, you don't need to have instructions when you can have design cues that guide the user. For example, in a navigation menu, for compressing links in mobile as what we call the burger menu, those 3 lines, okay, that's an example. Or making buttons look clickable, right, where it doesn't look like a flat piece of background, it looks like it pops out and wants you to click on it, similar to how you see like a big red or shiny button on a vending machine or one of those claw machines, just as an example. Okay, make interactive elements look interactive. Another example is if you have a slideshow on your site, you don't have a slideshow and underneath that instruction that says click next to go to the next slide. You see the arrow, or maybe there's an animation and the user already knows, oh, this is something that slides, this is something that scrolls, this is something I can pull on, this is something I can pinch, etc. Okay, thanks for bearing with me until this point. We just have one more thing that I want to talk about, and we'll keep it short because we've already mentioned it quite a bit. Responsive design. Think about responsive design as early as possible. As a byproduct of following our rules from earlier, where we talked about layouts, like the grid, for example, is you will already create the foundations of a responsive application or website. Okay, but just to drive that point home, make sure you think about mobile early. Like this, what we are busy with now is the App Academy. So our main focus here is creating apps. We have to make sure that we create things that look beautiful and work well on our mobile phones. Okay, it's not good enough to just make it look good on websites. So make sure to think about how your stuff is going to look on smaller devices and bigger devices too. How are your columns and your grids going to arrange? How are you going to use media queries? And then it'll also guide some of your content as well, right? But that's too specific. But having these rules early on and thinking about them will help you to avoid certain pitfalls later on, okay? And remember, when designing for, just small difference when designing for desktop versus designing for mobile is on desktop you're designing for keyboard and mouse and a pointer. When you design for mobile, a lot of new designers forget about touch. They forget that people are not going to be using a pointer to move around the app. They're going to be using their fingers. So you have gestures and you have to make everything convenient for people's thumbs, and that goes from like elements like buttons and icons and things that you're supposed to scroll on, for example, or where elements are actually placed on your screen. Okay, it's not just about shrinking it down, it's about making it respond to the screen. That means that even the entire design itself and the content can change its shape and respond based on where it is being viewed. Okay, that's all I have for you for now. I really hope that this was informative. I hope it helps to boost your confidence and help you to design better interfaces. Again, this is just the first step in your journey, just like the whole App Academy. There's so much more that you need to do by yourself. There's so much you need to research and find what works for you, where you are interested in spending out the next few years of your life and growing into. UX and UI design is one of my favorite parts of the entire process. I love working with the rules. I love working with the design parts. I love working with users to, crack open something and make it not just good, but really get the delight out of them. This might be for you. This might not be for you, but that's fine. I just hope that with what we've covered so far, you will at least be able to put a basic MVP out there, and while you're working with the rest of your HTML and CSS and your other apps, you'll be able to think about these concepts and improve the apps that you're building on by yourself using these principles to make it more beautiful. With that, I say goodbye, and hopefully I get to talk to you guys again soon. Please leave any feedback for us with the team, and all the best. Good luck.
All right, what an amazing session right there from Masi Katrara, taking us through the principles of UX design, the user experience. All right, guys, I'm sad that this is the end of this particular lesson, but obviously the next lesson that I meet you guys will be the end of the beginner phase, where we'll be having a session with Noltando and Talha, focusing on the Q&A and on a feedback session with you guys. And obviously after that, we'll be going into the intermediate session. I hope you guys are ready for that. Look, it's been an amazing journey so far with the beginner phase. We have some amazing facilitators and instructors who came onto the platform just to give us a little bit of nuggets and knowledge on what we have to put into practice for building those amazing apps. All right, so with that being said, please don't forget to follow us on social media, hashtag FNB App Academy. It's important that you guys are following us on social medias, right? You guys will be up to date with the prizes and the giveaways. You don't want to miss that, because you guys can have an opportunity to take a picture with me. That could be part of the prize. We don't know. We really don't know. All right. All right, guys. I am your host, Karabo Mahole. See you guys next time. Stay safe. Peace.